Hey everyone, how are you guys? What's up? So, I wanted to continue with this video series and on classic games basically. And also, since we started with Fisher, I wanted to show a few more of his games. But I wasn't sure which one to show until last week when I started reading a book on Viktor Korchnoi written by Genna Sosonko. He's a grandmaster living in Netherlands, one of the most prominent authors also of recent times. He has written so many incredible semi biographies on the top chess players of um, his times, his contemporaries basically, and friends. And Viktor Korchnoi was one of them. They were friends for more than 3 decades or so. So he knew him very closely. So the book is more of his anecdotes, his impressions of Korchnoi, and it also has events. Uh, it also contains events in Korchnoi's life which shaped him as a person. I'm yet to finish the book, so I'll speak more about it once I finish it. The name of the book is Evil Doer. The reason for the title, I will speak much more about this when I actually speak on the book itself. So, anyway, how I thought of uh, analyzing this game was I realized that Korchnoi was such a strong person and he was such a big fighter. Obviously, everyone knows his chess achievements. He is one of the biggest legends of chess, one of the top players. He's considered to be one of the strongest players ever to not have become world champion, even though he played in 10 world championship cycles. And his first world championship match against Karpov, he qualified for it at the age of 46. He was 47 when he actually played the match in Baguio. He played two world championship matches against Karpov, and he kept on playing chess until the very last years of his life. He won the Swiss national championship at the age of around 80, and he was in world top 100. He was number 85 in the list at the age of 75. Can you believe that, guys? So he has had an incredible career full of determination, but mainly what comes through is his fighting spirit and self belief. And I feel I feel it was shaped a lot due to what he went through in his life. He went through a lot of personal hardship in his life. And same with Fisher, right? He also went through a lot of personal hardship. So that's the reason I was curious to see what was their score like and what were the games like. I thought they must be full of fight, their games. And rightly so, they actually played 10 games against each other, and six of them were decisive. There were only four draws. They played six decisive games. So this one was one of their first encounters in the Interzonal 1962, which was held at Stockholm. Fischer was only 19 years old at this point. He was actually 18. He turned 19 a few days after this tournament, and he won this tournament. So it was his first victory actually at the international senior level, and it kind of made the Russians sit up and take notice of him. They actually made a they assigned a group to study his games after this tournament because they started taking him very, very seriously and realized he's going to be a threat to the Soviet domination of the chess world. So let's see the game. It's also annotated by Fisher in his book My 60 Memorable Games, and he titles it as Gaston and Alphonse. We will get to that later. So the game was a Roy Lopez defense. Fischer is white and Viktor Korchnoi was playing black. And this is the main line of the Roy Lopez variation. So short castle, c3, d6. And here usually white plays h3, which is the main line. And this move can be replied by various ways. One is bishop b7, which is the Decisive variation. One is knight b8, which is the Breyer variation, which is super popular right now. I mean, in today's times. And one is knight a5, the Chigorian variation, which was very popular, let's say in the 80s, even around this time. I think it was one of the main lines. But Korchnoi mentions that had Fischer played h3, he was planning to play h6, which was a new idea sort of introduced by Smyslov very, very recently, as in near to this tournament, probably in this tournament itself. So Korchnoi was very keen to try this idea against Fischer, but Fischer played d4 instead over here. So this is another variation. It is not the main variation, but it is basically more straightforward. And I used to play this line a lot as a teenager. I checked my database. I have like 16 games in this variation from white, and good score. It is very dynamic. It leads to a lot of dynamic positions. So d4, black replied with bishop g4, bishop e3. Here black has a few options. In contemporary theory, I think bishop h5 is one of the main moves. Black replied ed4 here. So c into d4, knight a5. This is also a very popular line. Even today, bishop c2, knight c4, bishop c1, c5. So basically, black made this maneuver to play c5. You know, this whole knight maneuver of knight a5 and how do I show the arrows? Okay, knight a5 and knight c4 was done to enable c5. And he also made the bishop go back. So it's not like he has lost too many tempos. It's worth it. So yeah, black plays b3 because now he has a chance to develop his bishop via b2 as well, by the way. He can consider it. How do I show it? Yeah, this way. Yeah, it seems I can't. Yeah. Need to get better with these chess websites. I'm trying to use a new chess website every day to show the games so that I also learn them. I'm also learning something new along with you guys. So c5, b3, knight a5. So knight a5 here is um, not the best move, I suppose. Knight b6 is much more popular. And against me, all my opponents played knight b6. And I was checking that recently, as in 4 years ago, 5 years ago, there was a game by Anish Giri from White against Magnus Carlsen in London Chess Classic 2015. They made a draw, but Anish was actually better. So maybe he'll someday show this game. I don't know. So it was an interesting game. But black played knight a5 here. That time though theory was still developing now. So whatever we know now is thanks to the games of these players. Against knight a5, there is the first game in the database is by Capablanca against Bogoljubov, and he played bishop b2 here. Um, show it. Yeah, bishop b2 here. And he won the game. He won the game, but black was okay. But Fischer found an improvement to Capablanca's idea here, which is the reason why knight a5 is not considered to be the best move nowadays. And he played d5, restricting the knight. So it controls the c6 square, sorry. It controls the c6 square. And the only square now the black knight can go to is to b7, because even the c4 square is controlled. And on b7, then later what future does he have is, let's say if he manages to push the pawn to c4, then he can bring this knight to c5 and sort of manage. But white can, when black pushes c4, white can himself push the pawn to b4 and again restrict this knight. So this knight has a lot of problems, and that's the reason the knight on a5 is not well placed. Knight on the rim is always dim. So that's why. So black played knight d7 here. He was faced with a new idea, by the way, already. So after this move, I think Korchnoi was on his own. Played knight d7 here. Knight b d2. Bishop f6. Rook b1. Here black played c4. But interestingly, Korchnoi himself employed this variation from white a few years later against Portish in 1967, and his opponent played bishop c3 here. How do I show it? Bishop c3 here, and it was an interesting endgame actually. They quickly went into the endgame. And Korchnoi played really well and won the game. He had a lot of space advantage and he utilized it really well. In the center, he had a central control and a lot of space advantage. So anyway, in this game, Korchnoi played c4. So his idea was to provoke white to play b4 here. So let's say white played b4. He was planning to play c3, pawn into a5, pawn into d2, bishop into d2. So white is now a pawn up. But here black plays knight e5, and because he will surely spoil white's pawn structure here, he'll take knight f3, he'll take knight f3, gf3, and this pawn structure will be spoiled. And since it's an open position, black will have a lot of compensation. Also, these pawns are doubled, so it's not like there is something big happening on the queen side either. So he was sure that this is good compensation, and Fischer also realized the same and he didn't go for it. So he played h3 here, Fischer. He doesn't go for b4, he played h3. He wants black to take a decision. If black had gone bishop g5 here, bishop h5 here, if black had played bishop h5 here, white would have simply played g4, then knight f1, then bring his knight to g3, and basically play on the king side. Now all his pieces would be on the king side, and his knight is going to jump to f5. He can even think of, yeah, he can even think of moving this knight and playing f4. So he would have all these ideas actually. So black decided to take on f3. Bishop f3, knight f3, c into b3. Also, one more point here is, if let's say black does not take on b3 and he pushes the pawn to c3, then white would have played a3 here, preventing b4. So he has controlled this square. He's prevented black from playing b4. And now black cannot support this c3 pawn with his pawn, so it's isolated, and later white will simply put his bishop to d4, exchange this bishop, with his dark squared bishop, and then the c3 pawn will become super vulnerable and die at some point. So that was the reason black did not go for c3. Black played c into b3 here. A into b3, queen c7. Here actually white had a choice. So some commentator, there was a, I think I read it in Fisher's book only, that Korchnoi says, because he has also included Korchnoi's comments to the book, in this book, My 16 Memorable Games. He has also included Korchnoi's notes. And he mentions that bishop to d2 would have been a better move here than what he played in the game, but it's more or less the same. So even what he played is good. He played bishop e3. Sorry. Played bishop e3 here. His idea is to either put his knight on d4 and then f5, or to put his bishop on d4, exchange this bishop, and once the dark squared bishops are exchanged, the like g7 square could become a target. The kingside attack will be much stronger. So he has these two ideas in this position. Black played bishop c3, rook to e2, b4. So now this bishop looks really strong, but it can always be exchanged. That's the point. White can always exchange it with his bishop, so he doesn't need to really worry about it. White played a really good move here, an idea we saw while discussing the move bishop e3, knight to d4, with the idea to play knight f5. Yeah, I need to get better with making these arrows, yeah. Sorry. Okay. I definitely need to improve on making these arrows. Okay. Uh, knight to d4 with the idea to go to f5. And black here could have played g6 actually. But not sure if he's okay. Like, I think black is already suffering because white's pieces are really well placed. He has a pair of bishops. He has an opportunity to attack black's king. So, not clear, but g6 was an option, and Korchnoi mentions that perhaps g6 was better, preventing. So, g6 here, yeah. g6 here, preventing knight f5 would have been better. But he played rook f8 thinking it's fine to allow knight f5. So white played knight f5 anyway. Knight b7. Finally, he wants to bring his knight into the game. So knight c5, knight e5. You know, the knight was doing nothing on a5. So it was time to include him in the game. And white decided to exchange the dark squared bishop, which is also a very strong idea here. Attacking the pawn g7 at the same time. So now the immediate threat is knight into g7. Sorry. So now the immediate threat was knight into g7. So black played g6, saving his pawn. Knight h6. Or abhi, you see the squares around the black king have become really weak. This diagonal has become really weak. So there is one more weakness. There is one more weakness in black's position, which was not exploited but could have been. The pawn on f7 is also weak. So later there are chances to attack it with one more piece because the f file is, white can occupy the f file with his pieces. And the knight is super, super strong on h6. Super strong. It's not going anywhere. So king f8. Again, white played a good move. Fischer was excellent with playing with initiative, excellent. Like, if he had initiative, he would keep on building up his position and bringing more and more pieces into the game. So that was his forte. He played rook c1 here, occupying this file. Now this bishop on c3 is super vulnerable. He can even play bishop b1, sorry, bishop b1 at some point and take on c3 and play rook e3 and just take the pawn. So that is an immediate threat, you could say. And in general, the rook was doing nothing on b1. All his other pieces, even the rook on e2 actually can be improved, but first he decided to improve the rook on b1, which was doing nothing, and brought it into the game, um, which was an excellent decision. And here, I think black missed his chance to play something which would have given him a decent position. Black played rook a c8 here, but a better move, I think, would have been bishop into d4, queen into d4. And the next move by black was missed by Fischer in his annotations to the game. Uh, it can happen nowadays. We have engines and everything, so it's easier for us to find moves. Here, black has this resource of queen to c3, covering this diagonal. He's covering this diagonal, preventing all of. Uh, this is really hard. Yeah. I should have done a practice stream of arrows before making this video. So he's covering this diagonal with the queen on c3 and threatening to exchange queens. How can white not exchange the queens? The only place to go is to d1, but then the queen on c3 is really well placed. And what is the queen on d1 doing? And he can even play king g2, yeah, king g7 in reply. So, uh, white's best chance is to take on c3 and try to win the c3 pawn. Perhaps this is the reason why both the sides rejected this variation. But what works in black's favor in this position is that the position is quite dynamic, even though it's an endgame because of the knights, and white has a lot of weaknesses in his position as well. For example, the pawn on e4 is weak, the pawn on b3 is weak, and the knight on h6, which is excellent in the middle game, is doing nothing in the end game. So it's super misplaced. And white's knights are suddenly not bad. They're jumping to c5, jumping to e5. They could jump to f6 even and attack the e4 pawn. So, like rook to b8 is an option. So actually this position is sort of balanced. One variation I looked at was rook to e3, let's say, something direct. Then black can support it with rook to c8. And if white goes bishop b1, again attacking the c3 pawn, black first plays king g7, forcing the knight to come back. Then black has this very nice move, a very nice resource, knight b6. Very easy to miss, especially if you are looking at this position from bishop on c3, on that move itself, on the 27th move, you need to take this decision whether you want to go into this endgame or not. The point is that after rook into c3, rook into c3, rook into c3, black can take on d5 because the back rank is weak and the bishop is on b1. So if e into d5, then rook e1, and black simply takes the bishop and he's fine. So that's why this position is completely fine for black. Not completely, but he can. It's a dynamically balanced position, so he could have entered into this endgame. But he played rook a c8 in this position. Um, And here already white is much better. And since we have seen what is black's defense in this position, there are two ways to prevent bishop into d4, queen into d4, and queen to c3 on the next move. One of which white played on the board, and the other one was rook to e3. It has a two-way idea. One is preventing bishop d4, queen to c3, and the second is with the threat to play rook f3 or queen to f3 on the next move and attacking f7, which we spoke about a few minutes ago. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, how does black prevent white's numerous threats? I don't know. It is not easy because one of his threats is also bishop c3, pawn into c3, bishop b1, and just take the pawn on c3. These are some problems black has. But instead, white played bishop d3 in the position. So again, the rook is eyeing the queen and the bishop as well. Queen to a5, he removes the queen from the pin. Now he brought the other rook to the c file. This was a very nice regrouping. Basically, now he's occupying this, he's um, targeting the queen side suddenly. And not just that, he's also threatening queen to f3 here on the next move. So black played knight e5, preventing queen f3. And here actually white could have taken on e5. This would have also been very good and probably a simpler way to play the position. With the idea if bishop e5, rook e5, queen f3, and let's say okay, now you have two threats, right? One is queen to f7. Sorry. One is queen into f7 checkmate, and one is queen to f6. So let's say black plays something like rook c7. Let's show it. Let's show it over the board. Rook c7. Here, white can take on c3, pawn into c3, and queen f6. And this diagonal, I mean, this king is basically very weak. He's threatening queen h8, f4. Lot of ideas here. So it's a big problem for black. So queen f3, the main move would be rook e7. Yeah, rook e7. And again, this allows a very nice move by white. Nice break in the center with e5. Bishop into e5 is not possible because rook on c8 is hanging. The bishop is pinned. Rook into e5 is not possible because f7 will be taken with checkmate. White's threat is simple, e6. He's going to push the pawn and take f7 pawn as well. So d into e5. And now as we saw, white had two ideas. One was queen into f7, and now that queen f7 is not working, we play queen f6, which is now working, with the idea of queen h8 checkmate. So this was perhaps like a simpler way to continue the game. There is a nice variation here. Let's say black plays king e8. White has now queen to h8. Now queen to h8 might not be that great because black just plays king d7, and the rook on c8 basically attacks the queen, so he does not have time to create something more. He needs to move the queen then. But instead of queen h8, he has a beautiful move here, which you can pause the video and think perhaps for a few minutes. A very beautiful tactic. Actually, maybe a lot of moves will win here, but the best move here would be knight f5. You are attacking the rook on e7. If rook to d7, then queen h8 is checkmate. So g into f5. Now queen h8 check, king to d7, bishop f5 check, and this rook will be taken with the queen on the next move. And white will win. So this was a nice tactic, which Fischer did not go for. He played bishop f1 here instead. So that's the reason why this game is titled Gaston and Alphonse. I will explain it later, but please note, basically Fischer has missed some simpler ways to convert his advantage, which was built with great difficulty. He really built it like so well in the opening and the middle game, but then slowly he starts to lose it, and black starts coming back into the game. So now black played knight c5. He gave up a pawn, but now his king is not under danger. It's safe, and there is no pressure here. Queen can't come to f3 because the knight guards everything. The knight on c5 is well placed. So suddenly his pieces are quite well placed, and he has compensation, and also white himself has weaknesses. He has targets in his position. So black is actually fine here perhaps. Yeah, black is fine here. Black played king g7, knight g4, knight into g4, queen g4, rook to b8. I think Viktor Korchnoi was in time pressure over here. And the thing with Fischer was that he was playing really fast in this tournament. There were two reasons. One is that, when you're in very good form, you just spot moves faster. The ideas come faster to you. So obviously Fischer was in really good form here, and he was not taking much time. It was a sign that he was in really good shape in this tournament, feeling confident. And the second is he was only 19 years old. In general, when you're younger, I mean, it's sort of related, right? Like you are just faster in taking your decisions. And he also used to play a lot of blitz in this tournament, by the way. I mean, he used to always be ready to play blitz. Let's say, his tournament routine was like this. So he would finish his game, Bobby, and whatever the result of the game, he would then pick up the chessboard and the pieces and go to a corner and analyze the game with his opponent, whoever it was. And that also would take like 2 hours, right? Like you have already played a game for 4 5 hours, then you then analyze the game with your opponent. So already you're like tired, but he would still be enthusiastic, and he would want to play blitz even after that. So he would, whoever was willing, he would play blitz with them, and he would actually leave the tournament hall only when the cleaners came in and they were like, now we are going to switch off the lights, so please leave. So he was super enthusiastic about his about playing chess, and he just wanted to play chess. He just, matlab, it didn't matter to him as to what was the format. He was just eager to play more and more chess. Yeah, so the point I mentioned this, the reason I mentioned this point was because Korchnoi was already in time pressure here around this point. So white played rook f3 here, and by the way, here rook into b3 will not work. Let's just show it. Rook into b3 will not work because of a simple tactic like rook into c5. So you basically eliminate the defender and you are also attacking the queen. So when the queen takes on c5, you just take the rook and you are now a piece up. So this uh, tactic does not work out for black. So black took on e4 instead. Rook into e4 also will not work for the same reason. Rook into e4 also, same tactic. Rook into c5, attack the queen. And if he takes your queen, you also take his queen and you're a piece up. And if the queen takes the rook, then you take the rook in his rook and you're still a piece up. So that also doesn't work. And black took on e4 with the knight, which was a good decision. The knight controls a lot of squares around his king as well. So it's also sort of defending his own king. And it's also attacking this vulnerable point on f2. So it's doing a lot of work on e4. It's like guarding this square, guarding this pawn and attacking this pawn. So yeah, that's it's also controlling this square, which is very important. It will be a key square later in one of the variations. So white played queen f4 here, and black played. So now, of course, f7 is hanging. We need to support it. So black chose to play f5 here, which is fine. It actually works. But a better move and a more solid move would have been rook b7. Rook b7. So while seeing this game, I was curious as to how come rook b7 works, because can't we just pin this knight with rook e3 and now this knight is pinned, right? I mean, now we are simply threatening rook to e1 and f3 and just take the knight. So rook to e3, black plays rook to, sorry, let's make the move, rook to b7, rook e1, let's say queen d5, f3. So black has two ways to defend now. First of all, he can simply play queen c5 here, because f into e4 allows rook into e4 and this rook is pinned because of this pressure on the diagonal, and you win the rook basically and black will win this position. So you can't take on e4. So black is completely fine in that position. He has won back his pawn. He's actually a pawn up, right? He's actually a pawn up in that position and he would be completely fine. However, instead of queen c5, there is a winning move, g5, because the queen is like super awkward. You know, this rook restricts the queen. This rook and this pawn, this restrict this queen very, very much. So for g5, if white plays queen g4, black can even play h5 with the idea of queen h5, knight to f6, and then you just take on e3 on the next move. You're attacking the queen. Oh, actually the queen is trapped. So the queen is trapped. And the funny part is that after rook into e7, yeah, after rook into e7, you can just take rook into e7. You don't need to give the pair of rooks either, because this queen is still trapped. So you'll win the queen and win the game. So rook b7 was a solid move instead, but black played like in this position. But black played f5, which is also fine, but because he was in time pressure, you know, when you weaken the squares around your king more and more, it can lead to some tactics. For example, now if sorry, if black allows it right now, the queen controls the c7 square, but otherwise white has this chance, yeah, of playing rook c7 at some point and then queen h6 and then mate here. These problems suddenly crop up because of this move f5. So right now obviously it's not possible, and A move like b4 is not possible because rook into b4, and that's also fine. So white played rook e3. Um, he has some ideas like f3 as well later, right? Yeah, he has these ideas. So black played rook e5. If black would play queen into d5 here, then white will play rook c7 as we mentioned earlier, and then just queen h6, and mate is unstoppable on g7 and h7. Black has to give up a queen. Uh, so that's winning. Okay, so that's not possible. So black played rook e5. White played a good move again. White played rook to c6. He's threatening rook into d6 now. He's threatening rook into d6 because knight into d6, queen into e5. So that's his threat. And queen d5 again, rook c7. So black played rook b e8. Sorry. Black played rook b e8, not queen d5 because rook c7. Uh, but this is also not working. So actually here black had a sort of only move to save his position, which was rook into d5. Just save the rook. Now it's not hanging on e5, and you remove the rook from this pin. Whenever white plays f3, I think black has this option of playing g5, just including one move like g5 and pushing the queen back, and then you can play queen d2 and attack this rook. And white's position is also not comfortable. His pieces are also vulnerable, so he has to be careful. So maybe white will take on a6 here, queen to c5, and just play normally like bishop to d3, and it would be a normal game. This was possible. But black played rook b e8. He missed white's idea here in time pressure. So white took on d6 here. Because knight into d6, rook into e5. So the rook was still hanging. Again, black had a subtle resource here which actually doesn't work out, but it's a very good resource. Maybe you guys can take some time and try to find it. We mentioned it a few times. So the move here, which would have given black good chances to save the position, was g5. So what's the idea, guys? Let's say white goes to f3, then you just take take the rook, right? So you can't do that. And if you go to h2, then then you can play f4, and that's also good. And this queen is really, really, really stuck, and all the pieces are stuck. So this also doesn't work. So white's only move here is rook d7. Give a check, intermezzo. That's called an intermezzo. When your opponent is expecting a series of moves and you insert a move in between, which was not expected, but like not the most, how to say, it's not like A, B, C, D, it's not like coming right after the move, but something like you insert something in between, which works to your advantage, perhaps. That's called an intermezzo. So here black has a move like king g6, and he shouldn't go back to the 8th rank because then white can simply play this, and then you can play this, and then you can try some mating patterns. That's not such a great idea. But he could have played king g6, and now queen f3 and queen a1. So this is a very dynamic position. By the way, this is already the 41st move, so they would have gained some time now and would have had time to think. It's not easy to understand what is happening. But this was a possibility. Korchnoi, Korchnoi in his notes gives, instead of queen a1, he gives queen b6 as the main defensive resource, but it's actually not, doesn't work out that well. The idea is knight f2, right? The idea is knight f2. The idea is knight f2 as well as knight f6. He has two ideas, right? But it doesn't work out so well because of a move like rook to e2. And for knight f6, here white has a brilliant resource, which is hard to spot. Rook to c2. Of course, it was shown by the computer. This rook to e2 itself was shown by the computer. And yeah, it's a very nice resource because knight d7 allows rook c6. And even though black wins two rooks, his king is super vulnerable, and this pawn is really strong. So let's say knight f6, then you just push c7, then you're now threatening bishop a6 actually. You're now threatening bishop a6 and c8. And yeah, black has serious issues actually with his king also, and so this is very good for white. But because of this subtle resource like rook e2, which was very hard to find, and rook c2. So anyway, rook into d6, white played rook into d6, and here black made the final mistake. So he played queen to a1 here, and white simply took on a6. And also 40 moves were over here. So queen to d4, rook to d3. So now black is 2 pawns up. His position is very good and he does not have any issues with coordination either. Black's king is still weak. So white won this game quite comfortably. Also, he has a passed pawn on d5, which he started to push. d6, g5, queen e3, f4, queen a7 check, and black resigned because the pawns are too strong. You can't go to g6 because d7 would be a discovered check with the rook. So king has to go back. White anyway plays d7. And if rook to d8, you can just go queen c7. And for king f2, queen f2, there is no mate here basically. So this is completely winning. And both the rooks are hanging, and this is completely winning. So black resigned. The reason, after queen a7, 44th move, the reason why this game was titled Gaston and Alphonse by Fischer. So Fischer has named all the 60 games in his book. He has given them titles, and this was given this title because Alphonse and Gaston are comic strip characters in the US, and basically they are known for their extreme politeness. You know, they are super polite, and that leads to a lot of funny situations. Ki nahi, pehle aap, first you go, first you go, first you go. So what happens is they both are passing the uh, baton. What is it called? the Baron. I don't know. They're basically in this game, they were passing the advantage or the chance to either save or to win the game to each other out of their sheer respect and politeness. So that's the reason he named it Gaston and Alphonse. Yeah, this was a lot of fun for me to go through this game, and I I would really like to show you guys one more game between Fischer and Korchnoi from it's from the candidates in 1963, which was the tournament after this one. So basically, but we'll do that in the next video, not this one. It's already very long. And basically, how interzonals used to work at that time was that it was a part of the world championship cycle. So you win the national championship or you come in the top three in your national championship, then you get qualified to the zonals. No, that itself is the zonal. So in some cases, like in the case of USA or USSR, their country itself was a separate zone. So then you get qualified for the interzonal, and the top six from the interzonal get qualified to the candidates, and the person who wins the candidates wins the right to challenge the world champion for a world championship match. So this is how it worked, and Fischer won the whole interzonal tournament, which was super strong at that time. He was the first non-Soviet Union player to have ever won an interzonal or a candidates tournament. So it was a big deal, especially, with the backdrop of the Cold War and all these politics. It was a super big deal in the world at that time, especially for USA and USSR. So yeah, it was a lot of fun for me to go through this game. I hope you guys learned something. And I would love to do a separate stream on Viktor Korchnoi because he's someone I admire so much. So I hope we can do that as well. Bye bye. Thank you for watching. Um, yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Please like and comment. Please share your comments. I actually read most of them. So please do share your comments in case you have any suggestions. Also, you can share. Feel free. And please subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Bye bye. Have a great day.